When people talk about the greatest rock bands of all time, two names always rise to the surface: the Beatles and Pink Floyd. Both changed the world forever, but in completely different ways. And while the Beatles respected creativity in all forms, there were certain Pink Floyd songs they would have absolutely hated. Not because Pink Floyd wasn't great, but because these tracks went against everything the Beatles personally preferred in music. Today, on Legends Uncovered, we dive deep into the 5 Pink Floyd songs the Beatles likely couldn't stand, based on their own interviews, their musical tastes, and their very honest opinions about long experimental rock. Let's begin. 1. Echoes. 23 minutes of sonic exploration. Narrator: if there's one Pink Floyd track that would have tested the Beatles' patience, it's Echoes. Released in 1971 and running a massive 23 minutes, this musical journey starts like a gentle ocean wave and then slowly drifts into a long, abstract, almost underwater world of sound. John Lennon once said he didn't like songs dragging on forever unless there was a real point to it. And Echoes, well, it takes its sweet time. Paul McCartney preferred melodies that grabbed you quickly. George Harrison liked experimental music. But even he might have said, "All right, lads, when does the song actually come back?" There's a moment in Echoes where the guitars start making whale-like noises for almost 4 minutes, and you can practically picture Ringo Starr sitting there thinking, "Are we still on the same track?" Musicians loved it. Beatles? Probably not. 2. Several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave and grooving with a picty. Narrator: yes, that is the real name of the song. And yes, it is exactly as strange as it sounds. This 1969 track from Pink Floyd's experimental era is 5 minutes of Roger Waters making animal noises, tapping rhythms, and chanting in a thick Scottish accent. There are no instruments, no melody, no structure, just pure avant-garde noise. John Lennon enjoyed experimental art, but even he liked having a purpose behind it. This track? It's the kind of thing he would have described as weird for the sake of being weird. Paul McCartney, who cared deeply about listenability, would have dismissed it immediately. Ringo might have laughed and said, "Well, it's definitely something." And George Harrison? He respected artistic boldness. But this track pushes even his limits. If the Beatles ever made a list of songs they couldn't tolerate, this one would be near the very top. 3. Interstellar Overdrive. Early chaos in the psychedelic era. Narrator: during the late 1960s, both bands were exploring psychedelia, but they explored it very differently. While the Beatles produced tracks like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and A Day in the Life, Pink Floyd created something far more chaotic with Interstellar Overdrive. A 9-minute instrumental filled with distortion, wandering riffs, and free-form jamming, the track has no solid structure or destination. Paul McCartney loved innovation, but he also loved catchy. This track is anything but catchy. John Lennon, who enjoyed raw creative energy, still would have found the lack of direction frustrating. George Harrison, who appreciated disciplined musical forms, would have struggled with its randomness. And let's not forget Ringo. He famously hated pointless noise. Interstellar Overdrive is full of it. In many ways, the Beatles and early Pink Floyd were exploring the same galaxy. But Pink Floyd was drifting in deep space with no map, while the Beatles preferred steering the ship. 4. Careful with that axe, Eugene. Narrator: now this one would have made the Beatles truly uncomfortable. Careful with that axe, Eugene is a spooky instrumental built on atmosphere, quiet whispers, dark bass lines, slow build-ups. And then, out of nowhere, Roger Waters releases a blood-curdling scream that shocks the listener every time. Imagine the Beatles listening peacefully, and then jumping out of their seats at the sudden scream. Paul would have frowned. John might have said, "What's the scream for? What's he trying to say?" Ringo? He would have just shaken his head in disbelief. The track is haunting. But to the Beatles, who valued clarity and intention, it would have seemed like a dramatic experiment without much emotional payoff. It's unique, bold, unforgettable, and exactly the kind of thing the Beatles would have hated. 5. Dogs, a 17-minute epic from the Animals album. Narrator, finally. The song that would have exhausted the Beatles the most, the 17-minute giant known as Dogs, a masterpiece for many Floyd fans, but everything the Beatles didn't enjoy in rock music. It's long, it's political, it's cynical, it's heavy, and it takes almost 8 minutes just to reach the second major movement. John Lennon disliked songs that preached to the listener. Paul McCartney disliked overly negative themes. Ringo disliked songs that went on forever. George Harrison appreciated ambition, but preferred spiritual storytelling, not corporate warfare metaphors. The Beatles always chose emotion over aggression, melody over bitterness, and heart over harshness. Dogs represented a musical philosophy completely different from theirs. Brilliant music, just not Beatles' style. Closing narration. Narrator, in the end, the Beatles and Pink Floyd were not enemies. They simply came from different artistic worlds. The Beatles built their legacy on melody, emotion, and compact songwriting that changed the world within just 3 or 4 minutes. Pink Floyd, on the other hand, built entire universes. Constructed slowly, layer by layer, over 15-minute sound journeys filled with symbolism and atmosphere. 2 bands, 2 visions, both legendary in their own way. But if you ever imagined the Beatles sitting together, listening to Pink Floyd's most experimental tracks, well, let's just say some of those songs would have sent them running for the stop button. This has been Legends Uncovered, where the greatest stories in music come back to life.